Hello and welcome to another screencast on injury prevention this time. So again, just a reminder in regards to these lessons, if you see a yellow text box, they are the tasks for students. If you see a green text box, they are the student note-taking. A blue text box for differentiation and a red text box for teaching and learning strategies, primarily for teachers. So what does AQA syllabus say for this particular topic? Well, obviously students need to be aware that the type of training, the type of intensity that you do while you are training should match the training purpose. So it's important that they're aware of that aspect. They also need to be aware of the fact that there are different factors which can prevent injury, and also they need to be aware of different concepts within this topic, such as overtraining, taping and bracing, hydration, rest and recovery, and a few more other keywords. So first task, you can see the bottom right for the students. So once they've got the title down, is to think about their prior knowledge. So to write down as many ways as possible of preventing injuries in sports. So pause your video there and then we'll move on to the next slide. Okay, so next slide. And before we go through the different ways of preventing injury, I want you to look at these two pictures. Again, I just want you to pause your video now as you watch these two pictures and try and complete that task. So again, writing down as many ways that you can see the measures that have been taken below to ensure that those particular sporting women or men are not getting injured. Okay, and then the third task, before again we go through some of the content, just want you to kind of stop the video here. There's a YouTube link. It's on a film, an old film called KES, and it watches a PE lesson in particular. So I want you to click on that link. I want you to watch the PE lesson, and I want you to identify as many risks that you can see occurring in the lesson. So write down anything. This is a really useful video, especially when you're learning to teach and learning to teach PE in particular, just in regards to kind of things that shouldn't be done. So you should be able to come up with at least 20, if not 25 different risks really. So pause it there. And once you've finished pausing the video, then once you've got your risks down, I want you now to try in a different colour pen next to your risks. I want you to kind of write down a way in which we could minimize that risk. So for example, you'd have probably noticed in the video that you just watched on KES that the particular students that were playing the football match, they didn't really have any equipment. So they didn't, for example, have shin pads on, or the teacher didn't check for appropriate footwear. So next to that, I want you just in a different colour pen to kind of write down what we could do to minimise that risk. So for example, ensuring that all students had shin pads on. Okay, another task for you now to think about, and I want you to think about it if you were a personal trainer. So you can see there, you're a personal trainer and giving advice to your client. I want you to just underneath this example, I want you to write down a paragraph, 4 or 5 lines, just thinking about what you would say to your client, giving them advice on how not to get injured. Stop the video here again as you do that. If you're really struggling with this particular task after a few minutes, then click on the next slide and just have a look at some of the keywords to maybe help you design and write your paragraph. Okay, so let's just look at what you perhaps have written. So think of, did you include any of these following words? So you might want to just tick off in your paragraph if you did. So some of the words that you could have used, you could have talked about warm-ups, cool-downs. You could have mentioned that the client needs to use correct technique, and that they need to keep themselves hydrated. Obviously, they need to ensure that they've got the appropriate footwear and clothing for this particular exercise session that they're doing. If they do have any injuries, that they might require some sort of support or a brace to support that injury. They should be stretching beforehand, which links into the idea of a warm-up and a cool-down. There needs to be appropriate rest as well in between maybe their sets and in between their actual exercise sessions per week, and so on. So you can see there in the blue really sort of a differentiated task. So once you've carried out your paragraph, see what you can tick off and what you haven't included, and maybe now pick 2 words to extend your paragraph slightly. So we're looking at a bit of extended writing here. Okay, so I'll give you a minute or 2 to do that again, and obviously pause the video at this point. Okay, so ways to prevent injury, so things that we need to really know about in regards to this topic. So obviously the following points can be, as it says, they're considered to be a golden rule of staying safe in sport. We always need to warm up, okay, before we participate in any exercise, and we should obviously participate in a cool down as well. You'll see in the next lesson the key kind of definitions and what aspects are involved in warm up and cool down. Second of all, we need to avoid overtraining. So rest and recovery is significantly important, especially if we're trying to prevent injury, so that we can help our muscle fibers recover, rest, and build and grow and repair during that phase. We also need to ensure that we wear appropriate clothing, footwear, and so on for the specific activity. And that can include obviously things like supportive braces, taping injury as well, if we have a suspected injury, or we've got an injury that we're kind of recovering from in the past. Also complete stretches as part of the warm-up, also ensuring that we don't overstretch, so we limit ourselves to the range of movement possible, and that we try not to overstretch at any point to cause too much damage. And when also employing the right technique. You know, the concept of practice makes perfect. Well, really, it's practice makes permanent. And if we're doing good, correct practice, then that will obviously help in regards to our technique and ensure that we don't get ourselves injured, especially when, for example, we're lifting heavy weights in an exercise gym. Taking a plenty of rest in between, and especially those high intensity sessions, that we are taking that rest. It's very important. And keeping hydrated, that's really important as well, so that we don't dehydrate. Obviously that can help prevent injury as well. Okay, so other aspects that we need to be aware of, especially when we're looking at specific training types. So as it says here, warm-ups should stretch the muscles being used in the session. We'll be talking about warm-ups in more detail next lesson. But on top of that, obviously overtraining should be avoided, and we try not to lift too close to our 1 rep maximum. Okay, so if I've got 100 kg that I'm lifting, I don't want to be lifting 95 to 100 if that's my 1 rep maximum. Okay, I want to be lifting slightly lower than that, depending on you know, how much I'm trying to train. If I'm trying to train muscular strength, if I'm trying to train muscular endurance, then it might be between 60 and 80% and so on. But we don't want to be too close to our 1 rep maximum. As well as that, obviously ensuring that we have the right equipment, we have the right footwear, and that our clothing doesn't maybe get caught in various kind of weight machines and free weights and so on. And also just providing things like taping and bracing, especially to specific joint areas that might be more susceptible to injury, and that could be in, you know, as you can see there with the weightlifter who's sort of just squatting, okay, in the ankle regions. That could be also in the knees, and it could also be in the wrists in particular. Hydration, as it says there, should be maintained. More important for activities in which water is lost as sweat, so that we do not dehydrate, and the technique that we use is correct. Okay, otherwise we are going to cause ourselves chronic injuries, okay, which is kind of overuse and repetitive use injuries. Spotters might be required, especially for things like weightlifting, so that we have someone else there to ensure that if we are struggling in a certain set or the amount of reps that we're doing, they're there and they can take the load off us during that time. and as well as that, obviously taking appropriate rests to help our muscles recover. And I've just given an example there of things like a circuit training. Yeah, so after we've maybe performed hard and worked hard in a particular station on a circuit, after those 30 seconds of working or a minute of working, we need to take obviously maybe 30 seconds to a minute of rest as well. Okay, so obviously I think it's important that you try and complete the worksheets attached to this particular lesson. Go through them at your own pace, obviously, but ensure that you are fully aware of aspects involving how to reduce the risk of injury. And on the last slide here, on the next slide, you'll see a little bit more about sort of bracing and taping for your note taking. So as you can see here, taping and bracing, this basically supports the areas around specific ligaments, okay, where we can have ligament damage if we sprain an ankle, so if we turn over our ankle, for example, and taping in these particular areas provides a little bit more support. It can also provide a little bit sort of more psychological benefits as well if we feel as though we have a certain specific weak area or past injury that's now being supported again, that we can go in full-blooded maybe into a tackle and so on, so that we're not going in half-heartedly, for example. Taping, as it says there, needs to be expertly done, so through a physiologist, so through someone in the medical team who will be able to provide support, but also without limiting the range of movement, without limiting the mobility itself. Braces must be fully adjustable to limit movements in joints with stretched ligaments. So braces are a little bit more sort of refined in regards to our particular movement. So you can see there the knee brace in the actual run itself, the long distance run. So it's really supporting that particular area so that the mobility isn't too extensive to prevent too much injury. From a teacher's point of view, the last slide here in terms of teaching and learning ideas. So obviously completing those worksheets in the lesson will help obviously yourself recognise which students are capable and understand the topic. I would also kind of get the students to create sort of a mind map on this specific task, because what I quite like about this topic is that you can link it to other topics within the syllabus. So in terms of injury prevention, I think an extension in regards to the mind map, you can kind of look at ways in which, once they've identified what prevents injury, well, if that prevention was taken away, what types of injury might occur. So, for example, if a helmet wasn't used in cricket, and then obviously the ball hit the helmet, or hit the head, should I say, rather than the helmet, then obviously that might cause a concussion. So there's a real kind of bridge and a crossover there in regards to students identifying what types of injuries might occur if we didn't have those preventions in place, and that kind of starts bridging that sort of gap in interlinking certain topics together. The other thing I would look to do is kind of like a word association game, which I would do with my students. So this is kind of pairing them up and getting them to think about a specific sport. And I call this kind of like playing word tennis. So they say a word back and forth between each other until one person either hesitates or can't answer within 5 seconds. So this could be, for example, you might put the topic of cricket up on the board as a picture. And then the students have to think about words that kind of, or pieces of maybe equipment that perhaps can prevent injuries. So that could be, for example, cricket pads, followed by helmet, followed by thigh pad, followed by gloves, followed by the arm guard, followed by the box, and so on, really, until one person can't answer anymore. And that kind of word association game is quite useful, I think, for the students, because they start to kind of really have to think deeply without looking back at their notes to see sort of what types of equipment are available for that prevention of injury. Okay, so best of luck with that task. Students, make sure you've got all your notes for that, and ensure you've got the worksheets completed as well. Thanks very much.